My name is Serena, and I'm 32. Christmas Eve should have been one of the happiest days of the year, but instead, it arrived like a punch to the chest, a reminder of everything I had never been in my family's eyes. At 10 a.m., my phone lit up with a message from the Harris family group chat. I didn't need to read it twice to know it would sting. Massive storm coming, Christmas dinner canceled, everyone stay home. I stared at the screen, the words feeling heavier than the gray clouds outside my Atlanta apartment window. I walked over to the window and looked out. The sky was dull, a light drizzle falling on the quiet streets. Not a snowflake, not a sheet of ice, not even heavy rain. Nothing dangerous, nothing to justify what my mother had just texted. I immediately called Mom. On the third ring, she picked up, her voice tight, rushed, tinged with that fake politeness she always wore when she wanted to end a conversation fast. "Mom," I said, "I just got the text. I'm looking at the forecast. It doesn't look that bad. Maybe I can drive over tomorrow morning and pick you and Dad up?" A sharp breath, then a pause. "Oh no, Serena. Absolutely not. The roads are going to be a sheet of ice. Your father and I won't risk it. And your sister, Amani, agrees. She just called me, said she's not leaving her house. I'm sorry, sweetie." Her words landed like bricks on my chest. Amani, my sister, the so-called golden child, had spoken, and that was it. The case was closed. Everyone was staying home. "Safety first," my mother said, but I knew the truth even before she hung up. I sat at my kitchen counter, staring at the two gifts I had wrapped for them, one for Mom, one for Dad. The sweet potato pie still warm from the oven, Grandma's recipe, the one Dad always claimed was his favorite, the one they wouldn't be eating this year. My chest tightened. The silence around me suddenly felt deafening, a hollow echo of years spent on the outside of the family circle. Christmas morning arrived with blinding sunlight streaming through my windows. I blinked against the brightness, the sky impossibly blue, cloudless, the streets dry. No ice, no storm, not even the lightest trace of snow. Just the beautiful Atlanta winter day my mother had claimed would be dangerous. I picked up my phone, dialing Amani's number. Straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Amani Harris White. Leave a message." Of course. She always screened her calls, especially from me. I looked at the gifts stacked by my door, the pie sitting on the counter. What was I supposed to do with all of this? I told myself maybe they were just sick. Maybe Mom had the flu and didn't want me to risk catching it. That had to be it. Clinging to that fragile hope, I grabbed my keys and drove the 20 minutes to my parents' quiet suburban neighborhood. I imagined leaving the pie on their steps with a note. Maybe they'd see that I'd thought of them, despite everything. The drive, filled with forced optimism, soon turned heavy. The street was empty, their driveway spotless. No Mercedes, no Lexus, no newspapers on the lawn. The lie crashed over me in a wave of icy realization. They weren't sick, they weren't home, they were somewhere else. Only one place remained possible. Amani's house. The 15-minute drive to Buckhead stretched endlessly. Oak-lined streets, sprawling lawns, gates and brick columns marking wealth I had never felt a part of. My Honda felt impossibly small, ridiculous, fragile. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. And then I saw them, parked in front of Amani's mansion, Dad's black Mercedes, Mom's silver Lexus, Uncle Robert's Escalade, Aunt Michelle's BMW. One by one, each family member's car confirmed it. The deception was not only real, it was organized. Every single person I had been told was staying home, who had supposedly feared the massive storm, was here, celebrating without me. I parked around the corner, my stomach tight, my heart hammering. I moved toward the side of the house, keeping low, sticking to the shadows like some criminal in my own life. Each step over the manicured lawn felt surreal, the wet grass soaking through my shoes. Peeking through the bay window of the dining room, I felt my world fracture further. The scene before me was immaculate, perfect, untouchable. A long mahogany table gleamed under flickering candlelight. Crystal glasses reflected the warm glow. A massive floral centerpiece sat proudly in the center, expensive and elegant, everything I had never been allowed to touch. Around the table, my family laughed, ate, and celebrated as though I did not exist. My father, Marcus, at the head, laughing at some joke from Uncle Robert. My mother, radiant, hand resting on Amani's chair like a queen admiring her princess. And there she was, Amani, perfect, glowing, laughing in her sparkling red dress, the center of attention. I felt tears welling in my eyes, and yet I could not look away. The hollow feeling, the one that had lingered for decades whenever I was reminded I wasn't enough, was back in full force. This wasn't just exclusion, this wasn't just hurt, this was intentional, a coordinated lie of immense proportions, crafted to hurt me while they basked in their version of the perfect Christmas. My fists clenched, my legs trembled, I wanted to run, to leave, to escape the sting, but a spark of anger ignited. They had lied. They had cheated me out of my family, my holiday, my pie, my gifts. And what they didn't know was that their actions could have consequences far beyond a single Christmas. The first step had been taken. I had witnessed the betrayal. Now it was time to decide how I would respond. Serena Harris had been left out before. She had been underestimated, dismissed, ignored, but not anymore. This Christmas, she vowed silently, would be remembered for more than just exclusion. I sat in my car, heart hammering, staring at Amani's house like it was a scene from a movie I had no part in. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of a Christmas jazz carol, every sound burned in my ears. Every smile was a reminder of everything I had been denied, everything I had never been. I tried to calm myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation. But as I watched my father lean forward, his hand resting on Amani's back, as if she were the only daughter in the room, that possibility dissolved. My mother's beaming face, filled with pride at the exclusion of her other daughter, proved it. This was deliberate, calculated, intentional. I felt the cold bite of the wet grass under my shoes as I moved closer. The oak tree shadows stretched across the driveway like dark fingers, but I didn't care. I had to see. I had to know. The dining room window offered the perfect view. Every detail was deliberate. The long mahogany table, the gleaming crystal glasses, the fine china that I had been told was too fragile for me, the centerpiece that could have paid my rent for a month. My family sat around it like it was a painting, perfect and untouchable. And then I saw her, Amani, my sister. Perfect, radiant, laughing. At the center of everything I was never allowed to be a part of. I could feel bile rising in my throat. For years I had watched her praised, admired, elevated above me, and now I saw it for what it really was. A performance, staged not for anyone outside the family, but for my parents to prove something I wasn't included in. I crouched lower, trying to control the shaking of my hands. Each laugh, each clink of silverware, each passing plate of food was a dagger in my chest. I had spent hours preparing gifts, baking my grandmother's pie, imagining the warmth of family, the comfort of inclusion, and they had thrown it all away. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound, a gasp, a laugh that drew my attention to Amani. She was showing everyone something on her phone, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Maybe it was a Christmas video, or a joke she wanted everyone to see. I couldn't see the screen from this angle, but I didn't need to. The display of her happiness, her control, was enough. Enough to make my blood boil. I backed away slightly, my body trembling. The injustice, the years of being the overlooked daughter, the scapegoat, the one whose presence was always optional, all coalesced into a single sharp edge of anger. And yet, beneath the anger, there was a new feeling, something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Because they didn't know. They didn't know that while they laughed and celebrated, I had witnessed their deceit. They didn't know that their carefully orchestrated perfect Christmas had a crack, and through that crack I had seen the truth. They didn't know that this time I wasn't helpless. I remembered the text my mother had sent. Massive storm, stay home. That lie had been sloppy, almost insulting in its laziness. And it had been a mistake, because now I knew their weakness. Now I had the first clue in a plan that would finally give me the upper hand. I sank into the shadow of a nearby tree, letting the cold wind wash over me. The family's laughter continued, a grotesque symphony of exclusion. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus. This wasn't just about a stolen Christmas. This was about decades of being ignored, diminished, and dismissed. Each slight, each favoritism toward Amani, each time my accomplishments were minimized or overlooked, all of it led to this moment. I realized I had options, legal options, financial options, ways to turn the scales back in my favor. I had always been underestimated, labeled the quiet one, the less capable one, the daughter who never mattered as much. But now, I could use what I knew and what I had to level the playing field. The idea came to me slowly at first, then with sharp clarity. My parents had spent a lifetime prioritizing Amani, protecting her, celebrating her every success while overlooking mine. They had created an illusion of a perfect family, one in which I had no place. And that illusion had a cost, one they hadn't calculated, one I could now calculate. I watched them from the window for what felt like hours, noting every smile, every gesture, every indulgent look they gave her. They were so proud, so sure of their control, so certain that I would never notice. And I did notice. I noticed everything. The way my mother leaned toward Amani, whispering advice in her ear. The way my father laughed a little too long at her jokes. The way Uncle Robert nodded at her as if she were the only one capable of carrying the family legacy. The way every cousin and aunt and uncle's attention revolved around her. It wasn't just exclusion. It was a performance of favoritism, a public display of hierarchy within the family. And I was outside it, always. But now, I had the leverage, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that their celebration, their perfect Christmas, had a vulnerability. A door they had left open, a contract, a family agreement that required my signature, and they would call for it tomorrow, oblivious to the fact that their actions today, their deceit, would have consequences beyond their imagining. The thought made my pulse race. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was strategic. I was calculating. I could see the pieces on the chessboard now, each family member unwittingly moving themselves closer to a checkmate I would orchestrate. The music continued, soft jazz notes drifting into the night air. Candlelight flickered against the polished surfaces, illuminating the smiling faces, the perfect meal, the sense of unity they had carefully crafted, and I felt something that was both sweet and bitter. The thrill of anticipation. Because I knew the truth. I had witnessed it. And that knowledge was power. I leaned back against the tree, letting the cold seep into my bones. Tomorrow, they would call me. Tomorrow, they would ask for my signature. Tomorrow, they would believe they were in control. And tomorrow, everything would change. The question was simple. How far was I willing to go to make them understand that exclusion had a price? As I sat in the shadow, watching the perfect scene unfold, I realized I had all the time I needed to prepare. The storm they had fabricated outside their house had been nothing compared to the one I was about to unleash. And this time, I wouldn't be left out. The phone rang the next morning. I knew it would. My parents, oblivious to what I had witnessed, were about to call me for my signature. The same signature that would determine the fate of millions, and unknowingly, the fate of their perfect Christmas illusion. "Mom?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Serena!" she exclaimed, warm and artificially cheerful. "We were hoping we could stop by and, well, we need your signature on a few documents." I could hear Dad murmuring something in the background, something about the lawyers, the estate, and tax forms. My stomach twisted. A familiar panic tried to creep in, but this time it was different. This time, I was ready. "Of course," I said, voice calm, deceptively casual. "Send them over, and I'll review them." The documents arrived by email within the hour. I downloaded the PDF and sat at my kitchen table, staring at it. The paper seemed innocuous, filled with legal jargon, signatures, and corporate stamps. But I had learned to read between the lines over the years. Every contract, every clause, every line was a map of control, and this one was no different. As I scrolled, my eyes fell on a specific paragraph, bolded in legalese, almost hidden among the minutiae. Clause 37. In the event of any family dispute regarding the distribution of assets, the undersigned holds veto power over all major decisions pertaining to the estate, including financial transactions exceeding $1 million. The undersigned reserves the right to nullify or alter agreements with unanimous family consent required for execution. My hands trembled slightly, but my mind raced. I was the undersigned, the overlooked daughter, the one who never mattered. And here, staring at me in black and white, was the ultimate weapon. $10 million. Control. Leverage over every person at that gathering yesterday. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering, eyes scanning the rest of the contract for other traps, other opportunities. Every clause revealed something about how my family had managed to consolidate wealth and power, how Amani had always been the favored child, the one elevated above the rest. The implications were enormous. If I signed, or didn't sign, the right parts of this document, I could destabilize the very foundation of their family hierarchy. I could make them realize that exclusion, lies, and favoritism carried consequences. And they had just handed me the key. I could feel the thrill of power coursing through me, a sharp contrast to the ache of yesterday. The betrayal was still fresh, raw, but now it was fuel. Every Christmas I had spent alone, every slight I had endured, every whisper of "Serena, just let her handle it" from my parents, all of it was building to this moment. I printed the contract, reading every line carefully. Each signature line, each footnote, each clause was a potential lever. And then I found it, the clause that would change everything. Clause 42. Any attempt to execute transactions in bad faith, including intentional exclusion or deception of family members for personal gain, will result in proportional financial restitution as determined by the undersigned. I reread it, heart pounding. They had just lied to me, excluded me from Christmas, coordinated their deception to make me feel small, insignificant, invisible. And here it was, legally documented. If I wanted, I could make them pay, financially, emotionally, symbolically. I felt my mind shifting from hurt to strategy. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. This was about justice, recognition, accountability. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to cry, at least not in front of them. I was going to act. First, I had to understand the full scope of what I could do. Clause 37 gave me veto power over $1 million in transactions, but that wasn't enough. Clause 42 allowed me to seek restitution for intentional exclusion. My family had just committed that act in spades. The combined effect? $10 million. My leverage was absolute. I leaned back in my chair, letting the magnitude of it sink in. $10 million. A family that had spent years teaching me I didn't matter, now at my mercy, and I would wield it carefully, deliberately, with precision. The next step was planning. I couldn't let them know I had discovered the clause's power yet. They were blissfully unaware of how much they had exposed themselves. But I could use this knowledge to orchestrate my next move. I picked up my phone and scrolled through yesterday's photos. Amani's Instagram, the smiling faces, the perfect Christmas tableau. My chest tightened. For years, I had been the invisible daughter. But not anymore. Not this time. I drafted a mental strategy: wait for the family to call, request my signature, or attempt to finalize the contract. Review every clause, every footnote, every line for legal advantage. Execute my rights under clauses 37 and 42 to hold them accountable. Ensure they understand that exclusion and deception have a cost, and that I am no longer the powerless one. I could feel my confidence growing. The anger from yesterday, the hollow ache of exclusion, had transformed into clarity and purpose. I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. I was calculating. I was ready. And then a thought struck me. The one thing that could make the lesson unforgettable for them. If I played my hand right, I could turn their perfect Christmas into a cautionary tale they would never forget. Every smile, every laugh, every moment they had celebrated yesterday at Amani's house would have a price. I felt the first spark of satisfaction, the same spark that comes from knowing the scales are about to tip in your favor. This wasn't petty revenge, it was justice. And for once, I had the upper hand. I closed the contract, leaned back in my chair, and let the weight of it settle. My fingers lingered on the table, tracing the outline of the paper. Tomorrow they would call. Tomorrow, they would ask for my signature. And tomorrow, the perfect Christmas they had stolen from me would begin to cost them. Because Serena Harris had finally found her power, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The phone rang exactly as I had predicted. My mother's familiar, overly cheerful voice greeted me with a warmth that barely concealed her nerves. "Serena, darling, we just wanted to follow up on the contract. Did you have a chance to look at it?" I let a calm, measured pause hang in the line, long enough for her to notice a flicker of unease. "Yes, Mom. I've reviewed everything thoroughly," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's quite comprehensive." "Oh, wonderful. So you can sign then?" I laughed softly, a sound that carried both amusement and menace. "Mom, before I sign anything, I think we need to discuss some clauses that are very interesting." There was a long silence. I could hear my mother's shallow breaths. I could almost hear her pulse racing on the other end of the line. She didn't expect this. None of them did. "You mean, you're not going to sign?" she asked cautiously. "I mean," I said, letting the words settle like stones in a pond, "that this contract gives me certain rights, rights you might not fully understand. Yet." I watched her face as she processed my words through the video call. The color drained slightly from her cheeks, and I could see the tension stiffen her posture. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant. You're serious?" she stammered. "Serena, this is just paperwork, just formalities. We didn't—" "Yes, Mom, you lied. You excluded me yesterday. You coordinated your little perfect Christmas around me. And I was left outside, watching through a window, just like I've been left out my whole life." Her eyes widened, guilt flashing for the first time in years, quickly masked by defensiveness. "Serena, it wasn't like that. You know we love you, it was just— the storm, the weather, the storm was fake," I interrupted sharply, my voice cutting through her excuses like a blade. "I watched the entire family gathering through your dining room window. The snowstorm was a lie. You and Amani conspired to keep me out, to make me feel invisible. And you succeeded. Until now." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the mental gears turning on the other end of the call. They had underestimated me. Again. "Clause 42, I continued, pulling out my tablet and holding it up to the screen so they could see. explicitly states that any attempt to deceive or exclude family members for personal gain carries financial consequences. You've just committed that act in a very deliberate way. Mom's hand went to her mouth, shock etched across her face. Dad, usually calm and composed, was staring at me with wide eyes, realizing for the first time that their actions had real repercussions. Amani, silent and poised, looked almost frozen, as if the air had been sucked from the room. "I'm giving you a choice," I said, letting each word linger. "You can acknowledge the exclusion, amend the contract, and work with me to ensure restitution is fair, or—" I let the pause hang, letting the unspoken threat fill the air. "Or you can continue pretending that exclusion and lies come without cost. But make no mistake, the contract gives me the power to enforce consequences, and I will." Mom's voice trembled, cracking for the first time. "Serena, we didn't mean— Meaning doesn't matter," I cut in. "Actions do. You created a scenario yesterday designed to humiliate me, to remind me of my place. And now, thanks to your own legal document, you have to face the results." I watched as the family's expressions shifted, panic and guilt flooding their faces. Uncle Robert, usually smug and untouchable, leaned forward, whispering urgently to my mother. Aunt Michelle's hands clenched in her lap, her jaw tight with tension. Even Amani, the perfect golden child, had no defense. She opened her mouth, but I raised a finger, silencing her without a word. "I suggest we schedule a meeting," I continued, letting the authority in my voice settle over them like a blanket. "A meeting with the estate lawyer present. I will be attending, and we will review every clause, every provision, every right I have under this contract, including Clause 42. You will understand exactly what it means to deceive me, financially, legally, and morally." There was no more room for argument. My family, the people who had made me feel small and invisible for decades, suddenly realized the gravity of what I held. The balance had shifted, and for the first time, I was not just a victim. I was in control. The following hours were a flurry of legal maneuvering. I spoke with the family attorney, carefully confirming my rights under each clause. Every conversation, every call, every email reinforced my position. The family's usual confidence was gone, replaced by an undercurrent of fear. They hadn't anticipated that the quiet, overlooked daughter, the one they had dismissed for years, would suddenly wield such power. By evening, I drafted a formal notice, citing the clauses that protected me, detailing the financial restitution for deliberate exclusion, and outlining my expectations for the upcoming meeting. The document was precise, professional, and unflinchingly firm. I sent it to their attorney with a single line in the email. "Consider this a formal notice that exclusion has a cost. I will see you in the meeting." As I hit send, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The anger and betrayal that had consumed me yesterday had transformed into clarity and purpose. I was no longer the invisible daughter, no longer the one left out. And the family who had spent decades underestimating me? They were about to learn that every action had a consequence. By nightfall, the house felt strangely quiet. The echoes of yesterday's exclusion lingered, but I no longer feared them. I had taken the first steps to reclaim my power, and every detail had been carefully calculated. I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer against the Atlanta skyline. The warmth of the apartment contrasted sharply with the cold of betrayal I had endured, but for the first time, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. I thought about tomorrow, about the confrontation that would finally force them to face their actions. I imagined the shock on their faces, the panic as they realized they had misjudged me, underestimated me. And I smiled, quietly, to myself, because I knew the truth. And now, I had the power to ensure they paid the price for lying, for excluding me, for pretending that their golden child deserved everything while I was left with nothing. The perfect Christmas, the facade of family harmony, was over. and in its place, a reckoning had begun. Serena Harris had arrived, and this time, she wasn't leaving without her due. The day of the meeting arrived, gray and overcast, a subtle contrast to the brilliant blue skies that had revealed my family's deception on Christmas morning. I walked into the lawyer's office with calm precision, dressed in black, professional, unshakable. The weight of my past, the loneliness, the exclusion, the years of being overlooked, had been transformed into focus and determination. Inside, my parents, Amani, Uncle Robert, Aunt Michelle, and even a few cousins were already seated. Their faces, carefully controlled in public, betrayed the tension underneath. They looked at me differently now, not the quiet, dismissed daughter, but a force to be reckoned with, and I intended to make sure they remembered it. The lawyer, Mr. Halpern, cleared his throat. We're here to review the Harris family estate contract, including all clauses regarding distribution, exclusion, and financial restitution. Serena, since you are the undersigned in key sections, we will begin with your input. I nodded, deliberately calm. Thank you, I said, my voice steady, resonant with authority. I have reviewed the contract thoroughly, and I would like to begin by addressing Clause 42, the clause regarding exclusion and deception. My mother's hand trembled slightly on the table. Dad's jaw was tight, Amani's lips pressed into a thin line, and Uncle Robert's smug demeanor was replaced with thinly veiled panic. The silence was deafening, charged with decades of family tension compressed into this single room. Clause 42, I continued, clearly states that intentional exclusion or deception of family members for personal gain carries proportional restitution, as determined by me, the undersigned. Yesterday, I was deliberately excluded from Christmas dinner, lied to about a massive storm, and kept from participating in what I had every right to attend. This was not accidental. It was intentional, coordinated, and calculated to humiliate me. I paused, letting each word sink in. Eyes shifted around the table. Murmurs were quickly silenced by the lawyer's firm gaze. You are aware, I said, leaning slightly forward, that this clause allows me to seek restitution for that act. I am choosing to exercise that right. The exclusion has a cost, $10 million, payable as redistribution of specific estate assets, effective immediately upon my approval. A collective gasp echoed through the room. My mother's face paled. Amani's eyes widened, a mix of shock and disbelief, as if she could not comprehend that I, the sister she had always dismissed, was the one dictating terms. You can't, my father blurted, voice tight, panicked. This is family. You're overreacting. This is ridiculous. Overreacting? I repeated, my voice rising just enough to command attention. Do you have any idea how it feels to spend your entire life watching your family celebrate someone else while pretending you don't exist? To see that staged Christmas through a window while I baked a pie for people who didn't want me there? I could see the guilt flicker across Mom's face. Dad's fingers drummed nervously on the table. Amani's perfect composure faltered. Even Uncle Robert and Aunt Michelle seemed momentarily disarmed. The law is clear, I continued. Actions have consequences. Lies have consequences. And exclusion has consequences. This is not about revenge. It is about accountability. I am giving you an opportunity to make this right, to acknowledge the harm caused, and to act responsibly under the terms of the contract. I watched as Mr. Halpern nodded, confirming that I was fully within my rights. The family attorney for the others shuffled papers nervously, clearly realizing that the underestimated daughter in the room had turned the tables completely. After a long, tense negotiation, terms were drafted. Portions of estate assets were reallocated, restitution was formalized, and a clear precedent was set. Exclusion and deception would no longer go unchallenged. My family, once invincible in their favoritism, had learned the hard way that their actions carried real consequences. As the meeting ended, I gathered my things calmly. The room was silent, each person processing the shift in dynamics. I could feel their eyes on me, some wary, some resentful, some quietly acknowledging that I had finally claimed my rightful place. Walking out of the lawyer's office, the crisp air hit my face, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The anger that had consumed me on Christmas Eve had transformed into clarity, power, and self-respect. I hadn't just enforced a contract, I had enforced a boundary, a recognition of my worth, and a lesson that would resonate through the family for years to come. Driving home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The small Atlanta apartment, the overlooked birthdays, the subtle dismissals, the countless times I had felt invisible, they had all led to this moment. For the first time, I realized that being underestimated was a gift. It had given me the patience, strategy, and foresight to act decisively when it mattered most. When I arrived at my apartment, I set down my bag and looked at the gifts and pie I had prepared for Christmas. The memories of the day before were still painful, but no longer paralyzing. They were reminders of the injustice I had endured, and proof of the strength I had discovered within myself. I took out my phone and scrolled through Amani's Instagram, where she had posted photos of yesterday's perfect Christmas. I smiled, not with malice, but with quiet triumph. The illusion she had cultivated, the image of perfection, had been pierced. She had seen me as weak, invisible, powerless. Now she had seen me as capable, determined, and formidable. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Not for what I was expected to be, not for what my family wanted me to be, but for who I really was: strong, strategic, and resilient. And in that moment, I realized something else. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about respect, recognition, justice. And I had finally claimed all three. The holiday season would never be the same again, for me or for them. But for the first time, I felt peace. Not the hollow peace of being overlooked, but the deep, satisfying peace of knowing that I had turned betrayal into empowerment. Serena Harris had been excluded, humiliated, and underestimated for too long, but she had reclaimed her place, on her terms, with clarity, strength, and precision. And from that day forward, no one would ever underestimate her again. As I set the phone down and turned off the lights, I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with holiday lights or festive music. It was the warmth of justice, the satisfaction of strategy, and the unshakable certainty that I, Serena Harris, would never again be invisible. The perfect Christmas might have been stolen from me once, but I had taken something far more powerful in return: my voice, my authority, and my rightful place in a family that had tried for decades to keep me in the shadows. And that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep, was worth far more than any gift, any pie, or any holiday celebration. Serena Harris had triumphed,